Welcome to Local is Lekker, where we tell lekker stories about local businesses. Today's story is about Bennie Jordaan, who is a passionate fisherman, and he also makes lures. He says the best way to catch fish is with your own lure. And I want to dedicate this episode to my dad, who went fishing with us from an early age. We had the privilege of fishing in Cozy, Port St. John's, St. Lucia, Mapelan and many other places, but most of all along the Pongola River and the tributaries on our farms. A lovely time growing up as a son of a fisherman. So Dad, this is dedicated to you and to my two brothers, Uwe and Heiko. Great fishermen, and here's a story about another great fisherman. Let's listen to a lekker story about Bennie Jordaan.
So this lure here is actually original, and then this here is the new version. This lure helped me stop smoking. So I took a piece of wood and shaped it generally simple. This is how I made lures back in the day, the originals. Simple carving knife, and I'd sit and carve it, and then to get the final shape was the tricky part. And I'd walk around with this in my pocket, and then every time I felt like smoking, pull a piece of wood out, pull a piece of sandpaper out, and I'd carry on shaping this lure until I was happy. And then when I got over my cravings, back in my pocket, and I'd walk around work and I'd go see customers and whatever, walk out from customers, and my wife used to complain because I had all this sawdust in my pockets that she had to clean out every day, because I'd sit in a reception and sand some wood and then have to hide it in my pockets again. And so yeah, that helped me stop smoking 12 years ago. And if I'm honest, the money I saved from cigarettes, I bought machines. So every time this was my incentive to quit smoking. Every time I made enough money, I'd buy a machine. So I made enough money to actually buy a sanding block. So this machine here was paid with cigarette money. The second machine I bought was a lathe. Believe it or not, that was paid for with cigarette money. Then I bought airbrushes and I bought a compressor. All cigarette money. It's only the drill press maybe, and I think the bandsaw that lures paid for. So I went from smoking to making lures, buying machines with cigarette money, and then using lure money to buy more machines. So actually nothing's cost me anything.
Hi there, I'm Bennie Jordaan. I think the only thing I like doing more than fishing is making the actual lures to go fishing. So welcome to my workshop. So I think catching fish on your own lures is, I think it's extremely satisfying. So as far as I'm concerned, the lure could be this big and the fish that big, or vice versa. Or I think at the end of the day, when you make a lure, catch a fish on your own lure, I think it's extremely satisfying. I actually recommend it that everybody goes and tries to at least make a lure. Anybody can make a GT plug. Anybody can really get into this and give it a shot. Probably building my own lures for 12 to 15 years, first years, lots of duds, a lot of junk, a lot of timber, splinters, firewood, and then maybe the last 12 years I actually made lures that sort of started working. Went from building hand-carved lures mainly, carving them, swimming them, catching fish, losing fish, and eventually got to a point where I went into the commercial world, commercially selling, importing, manufacturing lures, and eventually just settled on making lures, reproducing lures, helping guys build lures, building molds, and I'm very big into making resin molds at the moment. Moved away from the wood molds, and yeah, let me show you around. So the wood lures were awesome. I love wood lures. They're first and foremost probably my favorite, but the problem is you make a wood lure, swim it, gets bitten off, it's gone. That's the end of it. Your by making molds and making resin lures, I can reproduce the lure and I can modify it and I can change it. I can tweak it and I can get the weight exactly right. I can get a slow sinking bait every time. I can get a medium sinking bait. I can get a floating bait every single time, spot on, with high levels of accuracy and consistency. We can change the amount of buoyancy, the ballast, and we can play with those ratios. We can move the weight slightly back, slightly forward, and all this can be achieved within a day or two testing, put them in test tanks, rather than a wood lure that you have to start all over from scratch again. Once we've made our lure, we have to test it so we can determine the weight and how we'll balance the lure. It's called balancing when we add the weights. So either it's going to be a tail weighted lure, a centrally weighted lure, sinking lure, floating lure. But this tank is what we use to do that. It's called a flotation tank, and it's important that you use the correct water. So if you're building saltwater tanks, you need to use salt water because the specific gravity is very different to fresh water. So I'll get it topped up and I'll show you how we float some lures. So this would have been the blank that we made. The original blank in this case has a 15% buoyancy mix. In other words, what that means is I've taken my total mass of my lure, and out of that mass, 15% is buoyancy material, which is a micro balloon filler that we use to fill it. In this case, I've made some notes. I've got no weights inside here. I only have a straight through wire form, and that's all I have to work through. And I've got the wire form through here because I don't want just dummies. I want to know what wire is absolutely necessary in here. We can then float this and we can see its behavior, right? And then we can now determine, we can add weight to it and then determine exactly how this lure wants to work. So if we want to make a sinking lure, in this case we actually have to put more weight in the tail of this because I want the nose outside the water, because when I work it, I'd like this lure to actually break the surface and create a big splash and then dive down and sit under the surface. So we then transfer the hooks onto the new lure that we've already weighted. So in this case we're looking for a floating lure, and that's what we're waiting for. So the posture of the lure is a 60-degree angle and the nose just outside the water, so that when I rip the lure it'll make a massive splash and then dive down and swim. It's important that the lure swims well, and it's also important that the lure casts well, because if the lure doesn't cast well, it's going to tumble in the air and then the hooks end up hooking on your line and then it's no use. So even though you've got it 60 meters out, it's no good to you if the tail hook is wrapped around the line. It's important that it casts right, but first and foremost is make sure it swims right. It's important to get it to swim right, and if that means it doesn't cast well, so be it. So as a Durban angler, I predominantly make lures for myself. If I end up selling a lure or giving a lure away as a gift, whatever the case is, it's not because of an area they fish. I make lures for where I fish and then maybe overflows. So these are typically some of the lures that we would use in Durban. This is a 150 millimeter sprat, and then of course we do the lipped lures. In this case, fully handcrafted lure, lipped lure. And then we also do the slightly larger ones, not typically for Durban. And then of course we've got the trolling lures. These are probably the lures used mostly. Much easier to use when you're tracing and trying to find shoals of fish, which we will then throw the stick baits at. So typically when designing a lure, take this lure for example, a couple of characteristics that we look at for a lure. And I think the characteristics of the lure doesn't only apply to lure builders but also to anglers, and understanding what lures do, what you expect of them, what action you want, how you want it to swim, what fish you want to target, what retrieval rate you're looking for, what method you want to fish it, is actually quite important. And I think if you understand the lure and you understand what it does and why it does it, as an angler it'll help you as well. So some of the things I look for in lure is, first and foremost, is the shape and the weight. Obviously you get sinking lures and you get floating lures and you get different variations of those, and that'll determine the weight of the lure but also the action of the lure in the water. But looking at the shape of the lure, there's characteristics that will make it do certain things. So for example, if you take this lure, if you looked at it from that angle, for example, you'll notice that at about 1/3 of the body we've got quite a broad body. This will create this lure, it'll create resistance in the water, it'll cause this lure to actually swim nicely. So this will be a swimming lure. If you had the weight, for example, or you had the bulk of the lure slightly back, it would kind of numb and it would be kind of a lure that you would retrieve pretty quick and maybe jerk it a little bit. And if you move that forward, that bulk would give you a lure that swim extremely erratically and very hard. Another characteristic that I like in the lure is the eye. So the eye in my lures, I try and make them stand out and as proud as I possibly can. I make the pupil very proud. I try and darken the area around it, and I find that this is a strike trigger. One of the things we've learned from the lures that we've tested and swum is we've discovered that the bite marks generally happen with most fish, especially like Dorado or dolphin fish, a lot of the strike marks would be around the eye. So we know that is definitely a strike trigger, and fish go for that. So having a strike trigger will give the fish a target, if you like, to actually hit the lure. If we take this lure, for example, which is a conventional trolling lure, and this one was built specifically for targeting big bullfish, for example, you'll see that one of the features I go for is nice big eyes, for example. So there you can see the internals. You can actually see the eye from pretty much any angle, and that's because I've got a 3D eye inside there. So here we have two lures that actually are the same profile but different swim actions. So what we have here is we have a cup face, and then we've got the slanted head. So the cup face is going to add more drag. So when you've got flatter waters, then you look for cup face lures. These are also lures that you'll swim further back in the spread, so you'll pull them on the long corner or your China lure, for example, whereas these you'll pull closer to your transom. This angular cut on the face will actually help bring the lure back to the surface. We are looking for lures that will break the surface on a regular basis. So we almost want to time it. So lure must come up and then you time 1, 2, 3, 4 out, 1, 2, 3, 4 out. And in some cases when you've got either the boat is restricted and it can't move fast enough, or the water is too slow, or you don't have, then we can change the lures out to suit the conditions. And that could be changing the lure either in position or changing from cup face, slanted face, or flat face lures. Okay, so looking at lures and handcrafted lures or boutique lures, if you like, there's always a bit of a talk about the price and why is the price different. The price is higher. The thing is, lures like these are handmade, so we have to start with not only the body, but we start with a block of wood and we carve it and we design it and we come up with the design. But this lure will also outlast any commercial lure. It's a solid body lure. Internals are, in my case, are solid plate. These are indestructible. It's pointless even trying to give you brake loads on them. These can be towed by cars, and each one is unique and very precisely designed. So in this case we've got two different wire forms. These both are for the same lure, but in this case we've designed one specifically to cause a lure to float in at about a 60-degree angle, so the nose just pops out the water, whereas this one has been reweighted and redesigned so that it will create the lure, or give the lure the ability to swim quite aggressively. The body itself is made out of a solid polyurethane resin, which is a plastic-based material, and it's been filled with micro balloons so that we've got a certain amount of buoyancy. The buoyancy in this lure and the weight of the wire form, which lies in its belly, is what gives this lure its ballast to buoyancy ratio, and that is critical to a lure. If we move this too high up, the lure would roll too much. With the weight low, it keeps it stable. With the weight forward, we have a swimming lure. If we moved it back, it would numb the action slightly. But to get from that, we then have to finish it off to that, and that is a paint process. And this lure is specifically finished off with 6 coats of epoxy resin. So there we go, from cast body to finish. Building a lure from start to finish, we typically need to cast it. It takes about half an hour, the actual casting process, to make the body. We have a cure time, a full cure time of 48 hours. Once we've cast the lure and we know that it's degassed completely, because we've got to allow the lure to actually degas. Once it's degassed, we go into the finishing process. Painting is probably about half an hour to get the paint right. The process of adding resin can be anything from an hour to a week, depending on the final resins that we use. The final coat usually takes about a week to cure completely. Finishing my lures, I generally use UV resins. UV resins are just far quicker than the 2-part epoxy resins that you can use. The 2-part epoxy resins are good. It's all about time. So what we have here is a curing chamber, and in this chamber I can do a coat of resin sort of every 10 minutes instead of every 16 hours. And we use UV lights with a light wave frequency of 365 nanometers to actually set the resin. These lures will be ready and completely dry in approximately 12 hours. So talking about the size of the lure, I live in Durban, and a lot of our fish species here are actually quite small. We don't really target big GTs and that type of thing. We do get them, but for us it's kind of like a fluke. The big tuna, they'll get down in the Cape. So even tuna, kind of like a smaller lure, but this would be sort of like on the big end for the big tuna, the sort of 50 to 100 kg tuna. This is the kind of lure that they're going to want down there. GTs, if you can find them, they're going to go for this. A marlin will eat this for sure if you can find them. If you're casting lure, lure like this is stable, you can troll it. But obviously if you go north and you go into the extreme tropical areas, you're definitely going to be wanting these things. If you go to Basses or you go to Lazarus Banks, these are destinations that's achievable for all of us, and this is a size lure. In fact, I would say you would want to start with something about that size going up to this size in those destinations. This is a 180 millimeter stick bait. This particular one is a slow sinking stick bait, and we go up to the 200, 220s, 240s in length. That's for your extreme destinations. So fishing Durban, this is generally a good package selection. This would be considered on the large end. So this is a 180 millimeter stick bait, and I think for Durban this would be considered on the large side. This would be a very nice lure. This lure was actually designed through a challenge. It was more, build me a lure that we can target garrick with, leofis. And so I built this lure. I wanted something that was different, unique, but swims very well. So this is a swimming lure. This lure is a little bit different in most lures. This one actually has a carbon fiber core. In that carbon fiber core, I've got a magnet and I've got a rolling ballast. So what happens in this lure is it's designed to swim very well, but cast very well as well. So during the cast, in the action of the cast, the ball will actually break off the magnet and fly into the tail of the lure, adding weight in the tail, which is kind of like what we're all aiming for. Once it hits the water and you give it a little jerk, the ball jumps to the front of the lure and sits in its chest, which is the optimal position for action. it then becomes a swimming lure and now isn't a casting lure anymore. So this lure is fantastic. It catches a lot of fish, swims well, can be trolled, cast a mile, won't tumble. You can use thin leaders for your shy species. A garrick, you don't need a thick leader, you don't want a thick leader, you want a thin leader, and this lure was designed specifically for that purpose. That said, it is a monster tuna killer, this lure. Loves tuna, love it, absolutely love it. It's the perfect size, 145 millimeters. This lure here is a typical erratic casting lure, so it's actually quite a common shape. This particular lure is designed to be cast very far. It flies very true. The beauty of it is it not only flies far, but when it hits the water, it has a bounce. You have a secondary splash, which kind of mimics a fish trying to escape, jumping out the water and trying to get away. On its retrieval, there's two options. Because it's heavily tail weighted, the floating action on this lure will allow you, because of the drag, will allow you to actually twitch it a bit and create a walk the dog action. The other option is to actually just retrieve it with a madly shaken rod, so that the lure will actually bounce around from left to right like this as it goes through the water, every now and then diving, but then coming back up and bouncing on the surface. This is also a lovely lure. It works very well in the harbors, and although being a 200 millimeter long bait, it's not considered big for Durban. It doesn't have a large profile. Excellent lure. And then on the smaller end of the scale, this is probably the smallest lure I'll use. It's not the smallest lure you'd use in Durban. There's fishing called microfishing and so on, which uses tiny little lures. But for me personally, this is about the size. I fish from a boat, so I'm kind of spoiled for species. I'm not fishing for shad or anything like that. I'm fishing mainly tuna. I'm fishing for cuda. I'm fishing for maybe snook will take this. We're fishing for bonito, which is actually will turn into bait later on. But yeah, this is the number one lure. This is a lure that always goes with me. It's always on my flick stick. Fantastic lure. Also a swimming lure, well weighted for swimming. It comes in I make this lure in a sinking version, which is about 34 grams, perfect weight, which is about 1.5 ounces. And then the floating version, which is 24 grams, is just under 1 ounce, which is also an excellent weighted lure for casting. And then of course I make the bib lures. Now this lure is, don't confuse it with Squid 360. It is a Squid 360, but not the commercially available one. This is the original. This is the hand cast one. This is made by myself here, not in a factory in China. And it is designed originally as a casting bait, and has actually a swimming action that was meant to mimic squid. So you would swim this lure with the odd twitch. So you let the lure swim and then you twitch it, and what it will do is it'll dive nose first, and then when you twitch it will shoot up to the surface and then slowly dive back down again nose first. You'll notice that the bib on this lure isn't very large, and your toe point is pretty much in the middle. If you had to look at the profile of the lure and you include the bib from that angle, you'll see that the toe point is in the middle. And the idea is that the bib is not meant to make this lure twitch or rattle. It's meant to make it dive, so that with this design, the lure at best will have a very slow snaking action, extremely slow. Very good. I've caught pretty much everything on this lure. This lure here tells its own story. This is the very first one. It was built for a competition which it won, which was quite cool. Made this lure probably about 10 years ago, the original. And as you can see by its war scars, it has It's had the lip replaced twice. The scars are from wahoo, they are from tuna, they're from dorado, and from bullfish. In fact, the very first fish I caught in this was half an hour in the water, and it was a black marlin of 100 kilograms. But this is the original squid. And then for my bullfish and game fishing, I still love my bullfish. I try and make a range that I can use. The idea is that's your bullfish spread. And if I take these out of the equation, then I have my game fish spread. So these I'm going to use to target my tunas, wahoos, and dorado, that type of species. When I'm bullfishing, these guys come into the spread, and these are the guys that run closer to the transom. I think what I'd like to do is I'd like to teach people how to make lures. If I can convince a guy to make a lure, then I've kind of done my bit. I'd like to sell lures, but that's not my focus. My focus is really teach guys, make your own lures. I can't do the volumes that I'm required. And I'd just like to encourage people to actually go and give it a go. Make a lure, give it a shot. Get hold of us on Facebook. We can help you, point in the right direction. If you need any help, we're there. You can check us on DIY Lure Crafters. We've got a lot of professional lure builders there. We've got a lot of amateur lure builders, and even on the amateur guys, there's enough guys there to actually put some information together. So even if I'm not there to answer your question immediately, somebody will know something about something, but at least we're all on the same page, we're all asking the same questions, and you don't need to be embarrassed about asking a question about how do I do this and how do I do that, because that's what the page is about. And 90% of the guys on there are there asking questions, and I'm there, and I'm prepared to help you if I can.